Hello lovely people, I'm K3N and welcome to Wonky Wednesday. In this video I want to show you another variation of the log cabin design, which is called Courthouse Steps, which also features the light and darks, but instead of putting them, you know, how we have been doing with the darks on one diagonal and the lights on the other, you do opposite sides, lights and darks. So I'm going to make a little block to go in my journal. And then I'm going to make some bigger blocks. Well, actually, I've already made them. Cheated. And make a little envelope pouch. So, a lot to get through. Let's get on with it. So what you'll need is a foundation piece for your blocks. For the pouch, you'll need 4. And my pouch will be 5-inch squares. But for my journal, and just to show you the construction, I've got a little square that I think is 3 inches. I'll just check. Yeah, it's just over 3 inches. And all I've done is I've folded it on the diagonals, the same that we did with the Manx quilt, both ways. And then you can see the crease lines to position your centre square. I'm going with the red, traditional. Do I need to put a pin? Yeah, why not? It's so tiny, it's probably hardly worth the bother, but anyway. And it'll probably be in the way. But anyway, it's there now. So I've got a little pile of some scraps, lights and darks. I'm going with the leftovers from the journal, so they're largely eco prints, but obviously any lights and darks you could use. Now, the annoying, it's not really annoying, the thing with the construction of this, because you're stitching this side then this side, is that you always have to end your thread and start again. So I had a brainstorm. Why not use 2 threaded needles? So that's what I'm going to do. You absolutely don't have to if you find it tricksy, but I'll show you anyway. So you start with your centre square, and then you start with light. You can start with dark, but I've started with lights this time just for a change. And this is a bit of manky old sheet. It's been washed, but it's got these age spots on it, and I just liked it. So I'm just going to cut the end off because it's selvage. It might be lumpy and bumpy. And again, as with the normal log cabin, you can either trim that to fit, and in fact I think I will because it's quite long, or you could stitch first and trim afterwards. I'm doing these wonky, it won't surprise you to hear. I'm not measuring. My strips, I suppose, are in the region of 1 inch wide, but as long as you cover the foundation square, as far as I'm concerned, that's all that matters. So I shall start with this, and it's just exactly the same as before. To begin with, you put them right sides together if there is a right side, and then you stitch in the region of a 1/4 inch seam, there or thereabouts. You could, of course, make these in the way that I made the wonky log cabins with raw edges and, you know, folded. If it's a fine cloth like a silk, you could fold it in half and have a folded edge. I'm just going to piece these with a seam normally, but, you know, feel free to mix it up. So when I get to the end of this, which takes no time at all because it's tiny, except for I've just got trapped around a pin. As with the log cabins, if you were there, maybe you're new to Wonky Wednesday. So I'm going to imagine you're new, so apologies if I say things twice that you have already heard. So I've just pressed that open, and now I want my needle to be here, ready for this side. So I'm just going to sneak up somewhere through the back, and then take 2 or 3 big stitches along the edge, so these stitches will be hidden in the seam when I eventually come to join that next strip there. Just to get my thread over to there. Unlike the Manx where, you know, if you did the Manx quilt, you left it where it was. Now I just need all that thread and that needle to be up out of the way, and what I do is I just park it in the strip so it kind of doubles as a pin if a pin is required. And now I need to sew a light strip, not here where we would for the normal log cabin, but on the opposite side. And I can already see that applique pin is going to be in the way, so I'm getting him out. So just another light strip. This is obviously too big for a strip. I'm going to cut some that way. Get the thread hair off it. A few people who saw thread in my video of my little trip I took to England recently. By the way, I actually live in France. A few people were confused that I am English and I talked about going to England on a trip. I'm English, yes. I was born in England, but I live in France. Okay. So now, you see that thread's here and I want to be here. So I'm just going to take another threaded needle. This has got blue in. I'm using up the end of a Silco so I can have the spool. Look, I've now got an empty spool. You know what I'm going to do with that. If you don't, I'm going to make a stitch meditation scroll. There is a video, if you haven't seen that one yet. And I'm just going to do exactly the same thing on that side, sew a seam along. I wouldn't recommend using blue thread on cream cloth because it might show on the other side, you know, if that kind of thing bothers you. I just wanted to use up the spool, to be honest. I do a back stitch on the end. That's not strictly necessary, it's a bit of a habit. And trim. That little bit can go in the scraps. And then exactly the same thing as I did the other side, press that open. Finger press, again, if you want to iron. You do you, I'm not ironing. Come back up from the back. And you have to decide for yourself whether it's more annoying to have 2 needles and 2 lengths of thread on the go than it would be to, you know, stop and start. But I'm just saying that this is what I did when I made the 5 bigger ones, and I much preferred it to stopping and starting. So now we've got a light each side, now we need a dark each side. So now I'm going to turn, I'm going to get that out of the way because that's going to be in the way. And put a dark piece here. It probably makes less sense on these tiny blocks to have 2 needles on the go, but if you do bigger blocks, it does make more sense. I'll take this dark piece. And you see, so now want to put dark here and dark here. And it really doesn't matter if I could have carried on there with my dark, as long as you do light, light, dark, dark, and so on. You don't want to start going round, which I must confess I did have to pull something out when I was doing the bigger blocks because I'm so in the habit of doing the other way, and I was watching television and yeah, I started going round in a circle instead of side to side. It's quite thick there now because I've got 2 thick cloths. I might have to chicken stitch. If you're new here, chicken stitching is stab stitching. Because a lady in the comments a while ago said that her granny called it peck and scratch stitching when you go, you know, when you go in and then out in 2 movements. I feel every time I call it chicken stitch I better explain in case people go googling what's chicken stitch. I don't think Google will help you. So yeah, that's really thick. Never mind. Right, back stitch. The reason I take a back stitch, even though I'm not cutting off, is if you then jump across with your thread and you haven't done a back stitch, you've got a big loose bit of thread that might pull. And I'm not going to jump across, I'm going to take big stitches, so it wasn't strictly necessary, but I'm just explaining why. It's my habit. So press that open, come up from the back. Whoops. Get a little knot, get rid of the little knot. And just get that out there to where I want it. So just be careful when you're parking your needle that you don't put it anywhere up here, you know, where you're going to put your light coloured strip in a bit. It gets less fiddly, like I said, the bigger it gets. So now I need a dark strip here. I always like to try and find a smaller one just to use it up. Come on, Catherine, choose a piece of cloth. That one will do. So right sides together. See, when they're little like that, I don't trim them until I'm done. Oh, I don't know how many rounds, how many steps. They're not logs on this. This comes, I think, this layout from the Civil War, the American Civil War, when apparently the courthouse was quite a significant building. And you'll see when I've got a couple of rounds on, which is probably all I'll manage on this tiny block, but I really wanted to get on to making the pouch. Plus this will go nicely in my journal. Yeah, it looks like steps. I'm sorry, I start a sentence, I go off on a great long witter, and then finally I hope I do finish my sentence, and I hope you can follow me. Trim, fold. So that's a round of each. Well, it's not a round, it's a, you know, an opposite side because we're not going round. So I've got 2 lights, 2 darks. So now I know the next I need to do are the lights because the darks are, you know, not crossed, whereas the lights are crossed both ends. The other thing you can do if you've stitched your seam and you decide you decide it's still too small of a seam, you could just fold this back not all the way, you know, like we did with the Manx, but less precisely. So you end up with a little fold. So instead of folding it right back against the stitch line like that, you could say, oh no, I wanted that log to be narrower. I'm going to leave that more like that. I won't in this case, but you could do that. So now I need another dark strip for there. I got this little bit, oh look, he'll just go there nicely. He's a bit of taffeta silk. And again, let's have a look at how wide we want him. Well, he's quite skinny, so I think we'll just do a normal seam there. I just find it more pleasing for me to not have to worry too much about accuracy and to have little ways built in that I can handle not being accurate. So, for example, if you decided, oh, for goodness sake, I'm going to change you in a minute, thread, if you don't behave. If you said, right, all my strips are going to be 1 inch wide and I'm going to take 1/4 inch seams, so that'll leave, you know, you'll take 2 1/4 inch seams per strip, that'll leave 1/2 inch showing, and then my foundation square is going to be 4 inches, so then I need X number of strips, and, you know, already my brain's going, no, I don't want to do that. I want to just get I want to not get knots in my thread for a start. I want to get a foundation square and I want to get some cloth and I want to stitch them on. Okay, so now I need a last round of light and a last round of dark. So let's do a light here. Now when you come to the edge of your square, you can do one of 2 things. You can either just get a bit of cloth, stitch it on, make sure it comes at least to the edge or over, and then if it goes over the edge when you've stitched it, you can just trim it to match the back. Or if you're in the region of the edge, you can fiddle around like I did before, you know, so that you end up matching the edge. Now if I do that, I think that log's a bit skinny. So I'm going to sew a normal seam and then cut this off afterwards, I think. I just think that having all these little decisions to make as you stitch engages you with the process much more than having a preordained set of rules that you have to follow. But, you know, different people like different things. You see that comes well past the edge, but I can just trim that back to there, and then on the front it'll look like that. Do you see? Do you see? Do you see? So I'm just going to come to the end, not of this, but just of the foundation square, because that's where I need to be for my dark log here in a bit, or my dark step we should call it. And that is, when we've done the trimming, that little block done. I'll trim that because it's very long. Okay. So then what I will do, is just put some applique pins. Sometimes I do a little line of stitching, even if I'm going to join the blocks together, about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the foundation. So I might turn that over now and then run a little line. I'll show you on the bigger ones for the pouch. Run a little line of stitching all the way around and then trim, just to hold everything. And then that little line of stitching will get hidden in whatever joining method you happen to choose if you're going to join them. This one's just for my journal, so I'll trim it, I will stitch it round just to, so you know, so it lays nice and flat in my journal. I'll just put another pin there and then I'll trim and then I can show you it. Right, should really get bigger scissors, but they're all the way over there, all the way on the other side of the room, and if I stand up, the dog will stand up. That's my excuse anyway. You could, of course, if you had all that gear, go and rotary cut them with a quilter's square. I think that's good enough for my journal. And so there it is. A very wonky Courthouse Steps, but you see the difference if I compare it to those. You see? So there you've got the darks there and the lights there, and there you've got the darks there and the lights there. But you see the relationship between the two. And there you see why it looks like steps, you know, that perspective when you look at steps. Or they start bigger at the bottom and, you know, they go, you know, steps. Stop saying steps. Okay, so I'm going to put that in there. I won't stitch it in now, you don't want to watch me do that, I'm sure. That's my paper and thingy bob one, paper and cloth one. That's my Manx inspired quarter size one. You see there I did a stay stitch, but just visually obvious to frame the block. Then that one's going to go on the paper page in the journal. I can't say that every week there'll be something to go in the journal. I know some of you have now made a journal because there's the Monday weekly project, but whenever I can, some related thing, I'll make something for the journal. So you're not all there sitting there saying, why have I made this journal, Catherine, and now I've got nothing to go in it. Anyway, so that was the Courthouse Step block. So here I've got, no, it's okay doggies, I'm not talking to you, you just stay where you were. I'll get rid of all this because I think I've got enough stuff on hand. I hope so anyway. So these are the bigger blocks. These were 5 inches. Yeah, just slightly bigger than 5 inches, but they're all the same. The size is irrelevant as long as they're all the same. Sorry, that's the dog trying to sit up. He insists on coming up here, but he doesn't like the floor because it's laminate, you know, and he slips on it. Anyway, he'll lay back down. So I've joined these two already. So you see I've joined them dark to dark. So then I want to join these two dark to dark. Now there's various joining methods I've talked about in the first, I think it was the second video. I showed you how to make the wonky blocks, you know, these with the raw edges and so on. And then there was another video about joining the blocks in this Wonky Wednesday playlist. So I chose the way where I just butted them up, joined them with a strip, and then did the ladder stitching on the back. Because I'm going to make a pouch, so I want it to be as flat as possible because I'm going to fold it. So I'm going to show you anyway, so you don't have to go and watch that whole video if you haven't seen it or you can't remember or whatever. So all I do is I get a strip. Now this strip is about 1 inch wide, and I'm going to sew it first to one side of the block. I always lay things out so I can see. I say it every time, but I make so many mistakes myself. So I lay it out how I'm going to want it. So I want it with the darks coming to the middle. So I'm going to stitch the strip down to this side of the block first, and I am going to endeavour to stay somewhere in the region of 1/4 inch, because my strip is 1 inch, so I'm going to have 2 1/4 inch seams, and then the bit that folds over will then be the remaining 1/2 inch, and then it will cover the 2 1/4 inch seams. I hope that's clear. Right, so you can put pins in there if you want to. You can draw a line if you want to. I'm just going to go for it. So I'm just going through everything, through the whole thing. Right, so I just did a back stitch on the end, but I'll leave my thread attached. And then I'm just going to press that away from me and finger press. I don't have to tell you you're allowed to iron if you want to. And so then that needs to join to there. So I'm going to flip this over, right sides together, and then pick it up with the strip facing me. And then my needle should be hanging on my right. If you were left-handed, you'd probably have it the other way around. And again, if you want to pin that, that's probably not a bad idea. Now, where you're aiming from here, where you're aiming for here, down here, in fact, let's pin it, Catherine, let's stop being blasé, is for this seam, you want your seam on this side to be about halfway what's showing. So this, there's a seam here from the strip, and then this is folded over. So this piece that's showing needs to have a seam in it here, and then what's left will cover that seam. So if you stitch your line somewhere halfway along there, you should be good. No rule is required. So now you see that that strip there just fits in with the overall pattern of the rest of it. It's an invisible join, if you like. If we'd done a conventional seam, there'd be bulk and it, you know, it wouldn't lay as flat. But now for the back, and it's not strictly necessary because I'm going to put a lining in. But what I like to do, which is purely functional and not remotely pretty, is just run a ladder stitch along. So I just jump over with my thread, take a little bite about 1/8 of an inch away, and don't go right through is the important thing, otherwise it will show on the good side. And then jump back and take a little bite. So I'm just in, it doesn't really matter, you know, the foundation cloth, and I've got, how many layers of cloth have I got? 3 layers of cloth. So I've got my finger behind just, you know, so I don't go right through. And don't pull them too tight, but it does kind of help those two edges on the back just lay flat and not flop about. If you wanted to use this method, by the way, to make something where you could see the back, you could tear or cut yourself some strips of your backing cloth, and then I would do them, what, maybe 1.5 inch square, something like that, and then press under an edge each side of maybe 1/4 inch, and then whip stitch them on just to cover the, so you would lay your folded strip there, you'd whip stitch along that edge, and then you come back and whip stitch along that edge to cover your, you know, the join here. And you could, I've made quilts that way, you know. It's another variation on how we join them, how we join the Manx quilt blocks to make the cushion, where we used the actual cloth from the backing square to cover that. So when I've finished this, I'm going to join this to this in exactly the same way with a strip here. So I'm going to go away and do that because I think you've seen enough of that. If you do need more, then there's the other video, the other joining video, which I'll link below, because we're already getting a bit, I don't like clock watching, but I don't want these Wednesdays to get like the Mondays, you know. And then I'll come back and we'll make the pouch. Okay. So anyway, that's how it looks on the front. And then on the back, that's all the ladder stitching. But it's nice and flat, you know, it's got enough structure to it, I think, with no wadding or anything required, because we've got all the seams and everything in there. So then the other thing I've done is I've got a piece of cloth for the lining, and this is a bit of my tea and rust dyed cloth, and I've just cut it the same size, or torn it the same size as my you know, my pieced piece. And all I'm going to do now is put it right sides together. I'm going to leave unstitched a corner, so I'm going to stitch all the way around there, and I'm going to be really lazy and go and do that on the sewing machine, but of course if you don't have a sewing machine or you don't want to do that, you could go and do that by hand. And I'm going to take a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so I'm leaving a corner unstitched, 3 or 4 inches each side, enough of a hole to turn it out basically. If you do hand stitch or machine stitch, you want to really make sure that you know, anchor your thread here, whether it's with a few back stitches or on the sewing machine, you know, front and back. And the same here, because then when you start pulling through, otherwise you'll rip your stitches with the strain. So I'll be back when I've done that. So I'm just going to snip the corners, except for the one I left open, and just keep away from your stitches by 1/8 of an inch or so. Don't cut your stitches, basically. Just makes the corners turn out, you know, it's the same as last week when we made the cushion. That's the one I left open, so I won't cut that. Get rid of the little ears into the odds and ends pot. And then I'm going to endeavour to get this all out through here without ripping my stitching. Okay, so I've turned all that through and I'm just now poking out my corners with a chopstick carefully. Now the reason I left the corner open is because that's where I want to put my my closing mechanism, my bit of twine. Okay, so you can see that it would also make quite a sweet little cushion. But anyway, we did a cushion last week, so we're doing a pouch. So I'm going to fold it like an envelope. Excuse me. So this open bit is going to be the opening part of the envelope. So then the other bits are going to come in like this and like this. And I'm going to just match that and then wiggle about there a bit till it's neat. And I'm just going to whip stitch those edges together. So I'm just going to have a look first to make sure that it all looks nice. Make sure the lining stays tucked in. So I'm going to whip stitch up there, and you see I'm in frame. I'm going to whip stitch up there and up there. So probably what I'll do is start, I'll start here to make sure that those two match, because here we can play about with it. So what thread shall I use? What thread shall I use? I might use this. I'll use this, it's greeny beigey colour. Just embroidery floss, I'll probably do 2 strands. I think that's strong enough. I don't know what I'm putting in here. It won't be house bricks. You could use a you know, 3 strands or a cotton perlet or something else if you weren't confident in 2 strands of embroidery thread. But I think if you do enough stitches, then it's good enough. I have to get that out of there because I want that needle. So it's difficult to pin it because we're kind of going edge to edge. So I think I'm just going to hold it. It's only a short run. You could, if you had those clippy things, probably use those, but I haven't. So you can see my corners are a bit roundy, so it's going to be impossible to get them completely butted up. So I'm just going to come through the seam somewhere with my knot, hopefully. Somewhere, wiggle my way in. I'll try and I might go further away and pop my knot in. You just need to find a way in, because it's machine stitching. And then come out somewhere there where I want to start stitching from. Well, that end's a bit long, it's not going to hide, so I'm going to snip some of the end off. And I'm just going to wiggle at that rather than yank. Come on, there we go. Do you hear it pop? It's gone in. There's a tiny little bit poking out, but it's good enough. So, yeah, I might do that actually. I think I'm going to do that. But I'm going to whip stitch only through the top cloths, not through the lining. I think that'll be neater, but you know, I'm probably overthinking. It'll certainly be less difficult to stitch. You could do blanket stitch, or if I did blanket stitch, I'd turn it round and stitch in the other direction. So again, I don't think you really need to watch me do all that, so I'm going to go and do that and then I'll be back again. Well, that's done. I've whip stitched here and here, so now I've got a pouch, and I've also just put some pins here all around the opening, and all I've done there is just rolled the lining in. I'll show you. I just rolled the lining a little bit in with my fingers so that it doesn't show on the right side, you know, like that. I mean, that's, again, just extra fiddling for those who like to fiddle. And I haven't closed up here yet because I need to put a little loop there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use, I've got these beads from the broken necklace, from the necklace I bought in England. It wasn't broken, I broke it. They're just wooden discs and they've only got one hole, so it's not a button. And what I thought of doing was taking one of these tiny ones and doing that first, and then the bigger one on top that way, because I like that green. And that will make it stand slightly proud up off the surface, and then I can get my twiny thing round, and then I'll come up through the hole, go through the bead and go back down so that, you know, I can sew it on. Hopefully that's the plan. But I'm not going to do that yet, I'm going to put this first. So this is a tiny, oh dear, I brought the bead with me. This is a tiny bit of twine that I've made, which is about 4 inches long. And I haven't tied knots in it or anything, which is why I'm having to hold it. So I'm just going to fiddle about with it until it lays flattish, like that. I mean, obviously you could use a bit of ribbon or whatever if you don't want to fiddle about with twine. But I just like the dark and light with the dark and light. It's a big dog getting comfortable again. So I'm just going to try and endeavour and get somehow my thread through all the layers so it doesn't unwind anymore, just make it more manageable. Let's maybe one more stitch through there. And then I'm going to trap it. I'm going to stitch it to the back of this part, somewhat centrally. I'm not going to stitch down here because I need to turn this end under. So I'm going to stitch it somewhere here and try not to come all the way through. So I'm lining it up so it's, you know, more or less straight. I'm going to go in slightly more. And this I'm just really anchoring it. I'll sort it out better when I close up the gap. So I've got my finger behind again so I don't go all the way through to the back. And I'm just making sure I'm getting all the layers, just with a few utilitarian stitches. I'll go over there a bit as well. Don't want to do that, do we? I think I've got everything. I'll just finish that off. I might do a knot. You know, through the loop, I always go through twice. Oh, do you know what I did? I went through and then I came out again. Oh dear. One of those days, like I said. Right, there we go. I'll anchor the end a bit. So now all I'm going to do is put that in there so I can find it again, is finish my pinning. So here you just have to fiddle a bit with these two edges. I'm just turning in 1/4 of an inch or thereabouts just to match, you know, the seam that I sewed before I turned it the right way out. And then in this corner you need a loop to come out, and I'm not going to get a pin through that lot, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that corner, and when I'm stitching, when I get there, then I'll fiddle. I'll just pin the rest. I think that's easier than trying to get a pin through all that layer, those layers. Now you could do any number of things. You could carry on whip stitching, you know, as if it was a whip stitch seam, or you could just do running stitch. It's not even necessary here, I'm just doing it all here so that this has a reason for being there. That makes sense, you know, so it looks like it was all one seam done in one go. Well, I've decided to whip stitch around that edge, So I'm going to do that, and when I get there I'm going to fiddle about with that and fold that under. Maybe I'll go up to here and then I'll come back and show you the fiddling and then finish off. Okay, so I'm up to within about ½ inch or so of the end. So I'm trapping this bit of twine in this side, and then I'm going to fold that under. Would have been much easier with a bit of ribbon, but you know. So I'm going to fold the lining under, and then I'm going to fold the top under and make my little point there. And then with this thread I'm going to go through the twine. Might have to wiggle, not too bad. And I think I'm going to go in and out a couple of times just for security's sake. And then I'm going to come back through to the front, so you can see well enough. And then I'm going to just finish my whip stitching. Happened there, I've got a, well, that's just my thread tail poking out. I had to change my thread. Of course you have to change your thread right in where it's fiddly. Trim that off later. And I'll just finish up into that little point there. And then I need to get my other side, my twine, in its place. Styles, can you stop wagging your tail against the desk? Like that. Make sure it's roughly even as you know you want it to be. And then do a couple more whip stitches to get up to where the twine's going to sit. And then just do the same thing again. There we go. So basically I've got my little point in the middle and my twine either side roughly even. And then I'm just going to tuck the rest of that in and carry on down to the, you know, the other end. Okay, so I've gone all the way around there, all the way around there, my little point, all the way around there, all the way back to here. And I put a couple of extra stitches across here to close up that little gap because it was bugging me. So now I need to get this button arrangement on. So I'm just gonna, I've got some, you know, flossy stuff, the same 2 strands of flossy stuff. So I'm just going to audition where the button needs to go. And you want to sort of eyeball where the hole is, or the holes if you've got a proper button. And make sure that when the twine is round it, that it sits nicely enough. And I think, as luck would have it, can you see, if I line my button up more or less with the point of that red square, I'm in the right place. So that's handy. And I'm now wondering if I need the extra button underneath, because this button, by chance, is slightly, you know, dished. So I think I'm going to just do it like that. So I'm going to just anchor my, I've got a knot, I'm just going to anchor it there where it'll be hidden by the button. I'll just take 2 or 3 stitches first. I'm not super bothered if I go through to the lining, but you know. And I hope this beaded thing works. So I come up through the hole. I already checked that my needle fit through the hole. Through the bead. And then back down through the hole. I think I'm going to just go through the hole first and just make sure it's going to work. I think wouldn't see why it wouldn't. Done it before and it did. Yeah. So I probably need to come up and down a couple more times. That's always more challenging. So excuse me if you can't see. I'm just going in, taking a little bite of the cloth again, and then going back up through the hole. I'm just going to trim a bit of that tail because it's poking out. So then back through the bead. Whoops, don't do that. back down through the hole. Now of course the button is flush against the cloth, you can't really much room to manoeuvre. Of course with a normal button it would have been much easier, but I've got my necklace so I shall use it. I could of course go and drill more holes in the beads. I'll take another bite and just come back up one more time when I can find the hole. There it is. Through the bead, which is now a bit tight because of all the thread in it, and through the hole. And I am going to just go through to the inside, I think, because it's easier than trying to anchor it behind the button. I'm just going to make a couple of stitches of a reasonable bite of the cloth, twice through the loop, pull it up, and then I always anchor the loop, because if you then cut it, that thread will just come out of that loop. So then I just go back in. Can you see? Is it focused? Yep. I just go back in just next to it and just run my tail between the layers. I am virtually always stitching through layers, a distance away. And serious, stop. Sorry, he's anxious because of the thunder, so now he's licking his foot. There we go. And snip off. And there we have it. And I think that little beady button arrangement, I'll put that one back safely. It's just the job. Well, we'll see if it's just the job, if it now works. There we go. That's all right. So there we go, a little envelope pouch. And I just liked the idea of how the Courthouse Steps would play, being folded, you know, on its diagonals. But obviously you can make this, she said trying to pull it roughly square, you can make this with any square of any kind, just a plain cloth. You could just slow stitch a piece. Mine was about 10 inches square, just for guidance, and it's given a pouch which is 6.5 inches square-ish. But yeah, an envelope pouch rather than the rectangle foldy one. I think it's quite cute. So thank you so much for watching as always, and I look forward to you joining me next time for more cloth tales. Bye bye.